Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for day 3 of Oxford Sparks Facebook Live for Brain Discovery Week. Today we're delighted to be joined by Anya Tapawala from the Department of Psychiatry. Don't forget that you can ask your questions, just stick them in the comments box below, and we'll be able to ask them as we go. So Anya, hello, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's not often that you'll find yourself in a pub on 3:30 on a Wednesday, so can you tell us a bit about why we're here? What's your research about?
Yes, certainly. So my research is about the effects of alcohol on brain health. By that I mean memory and brain structure. And so this is the perfect setting to discuss it.
Great. So you did a study recently where you were looking at alcohol and brain structure. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Absolutely. So we looked at people's drinking over a long period of time, 30 years, and found that people drinking only just moderately had worse brain structure at the end of 30 years and faster memory decline over that 30 years than people that weren't drinking at all.
Wow, okay. Lots of fascinating questions there. So, moderate drinking. Can you tell us a bit about what in particular you were measuring there in terms of people's drinking habits?
Yeah, so moderate drinking is kind of variably defined, but for our purposes we were talking about people drinking anything from 14 units or more a week. So that would be something like 5 glasses of wine about this size or 4 pints of beer like this a week. So not huge amounts.
Right, okay. And you said that there were a decline in memory, so what sort of size of effect were you seeing? How did you test for that?
Yeah, so we gave the people in the study memory tests about every 5 years, and the ones that were drinking moderately, their memory declined faster, and the kind of memory that we found affected was people's ability to generate words beginning with a specific letter. So that's quite a complex memory task. It involves you knowing about how to spell words and how to generate them, how to suppress words that don't begin with that letter. So it's quite a difficult task and indicative of kind of complex brain processes.
Okay, and I think in the study were you doing brain imagery? Were you able to look into the heads of these people and see why and what was going on in the brain?
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of the 30 years we did very detailed brain imaging on these people, and we could really focus in on the grey matter within the brain and the white matter tracts, the kind of cabling, if you like, within the brain. And we found, again, sort of sobering results. So the people that were drinking moderately, they had smaller hippocampi, which is a part of the brain we know is really important in memory function and is one of the first areas to be affected in Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, right, okay. Was there any sort of connection between sort of alcohol consumption and Alzheimer's, or was it kind of a more general memory decline?
Yeah, so the suggestion is there, but we can't be definite that these people had early Alzheimer's disease because we didn't do this very detailed kind of testing that you would need to give a definite diagnosis of Alzheimer's. What we can say is that the region that is affected in Alzheimer's was also affected in these moderate drinkers.
Right, okay. So the study was over 30 years. That's incredible. Who were you talking to for 30 years to find out their drinking habits?
Yeah, this was a very special group of people, really dedicated, may I say, who submitted themselves for a 30-year period to kind of detailed questionnaires, lots of different measurements, and they gave us information about their drinking habits, amongst other things. So about every 5 years they were approached, and they had a whole host of tests, from kind of what they were eating for breakfast to how much exercise they were doing, and importantly for us, how much they were drinking.
And so when you were originally studying this group, I mean, were they being studied for everything under the sun, and you just noticed the sort of link with alcohol and memory decline, or was it just something that you'd intended to look for?
Well, so the study was set up in the mid-1980s, and they were examining a group of civil servants. It's called the Whitehall 2 study, and this study originally was looking at the effects of stress on health more generally. I came in late in the day and was particularly interested in the effects of alcohol on the brain, partly because it was something that my I've become interested in through my clinical work. And also we noticed that this group of people were kind of very healthy in lots of aspects of their life. They're doing all the sorts of things you should be doing in later life, exercising, eating healthily, but they did seem to enjoy a glass or two of wine. So I thought it would be a really good group to study this question in.
Okay, so even with a group who were relatively healthy, like say doing all the right things, you still saw this memory decline. So I guess that probably says something to people in terms of making healthy life choices.
Yeah, I think it was the first study, I guess, that really robustly demonstrated these effects on the brain at relatively small quantities of alcohol. In fact, quantities that we've believed are safe and were within kind of safe guidelines in the UK and certainly other countries. So I guess that's why it's caused so much excitement.
Or worry against
or worry,
people.
yes.
So yeah, and it seems like quite a small volume really. I'm sure many of us who do enjoy a social drink now and then probably think, oh yeah, I probably drink that much. But did you look at links with greater volumes of alcohol or different modes of drinking? So I'm just thinking, people who drink large quantities over small periods, so binge drinking versus moderate drinking but over a longer period of time?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and there's been a suggestion for some time that if you drink binges, that maybe that's worse for your health than if you drink steadily. We couldn't investigate that in this sample. We just didn't have that kind of detail of information or the numbers. You also mentioned about heavier quantities. It's well established in research that people that drink really large amounts of alcohol over long periods of time definitely can damage their brain, and alcohol in fact can cause a type of dementia, which I think is not well known. Again, because of the people we were studying and the fact that they had to be in this study for 30 years and give us all this information and come to Oxford and do the memory test and have the brain scan, we weren't capturing kind of really heavy, what we term as alcohol dependent or alcoholics. These were very much what we define as kind of social drinkers rather than alcoholics.
Okay, so do you have any recommendations for people? Because this seems like a sort of behaviour that a lot of us might be participating in. Do you have any sort of recommendations or things we ought to be thinking about with our drinking behaviour?
Yeah, I think the main thing is there's a kind of a story that drinking small amounts might be good for you or protective for the brain health. I think this study's kind of shaken that suggestion. So I think I wouldn't recommend taking up moderate drinking as a strategy to avoid dementia in the future. And I think just to be aware that even quite small amounts might have negative consequences. I suppose it's about being aware how much you're drinking and portion size more than anything.
Yeah. Do we know about how well the brain can recover, is there anything we can do? Obviously, quite a lot of us do drink socially. So, is there anything we can start to be doing? Do we know if that will help, or is it once the brain's damaged, is that kind of it?
Yeah, so in those studies of the heavier drinkers, so again, this is talking about people that are drinking large quantities over long periods of time. If there is some evidence, if those people stop drinking, their brain structure and memory can improve a little bit, probably not fully. So it's always worth stopping if you can. In terms of the potential damage done by moderate drinking, we really don't know if you stop drinking, whether that improves things or if anything else you do. I guess it's about being sensible and looking after your brain in other aspects. For instance, keeping your blood pressure under control, eating healthily, keeping your cholesterol down. Those things are going to help brain health. Whether they counteract the effects of alcohol, we just don't know at the moment.
Right, okay. We've got a really great question in from Maria Laura Vismora from Argentina. Thank you very much. They've asked, how much time does alcohol take to affect the brain? So this might be about over long periods, but short periods also,
Yes, so I guess alcohol has effects almost immediately on the brain, and then it has the longer term effects. So in the short term, if you're drinking significant quantities, you're probably aware that it can kind of disinhibit you, and it can affect your memory processing, so your attention, your concentration. If you go to increased amounts, you can experience things like alcohol blackouts, where memory processing, and what's happening here is the transition from short-term memory into the long-term storage is affected, so that the next day you can't remember what you did last night. So that's a kind of acute effect. And then the longer-term effects probably take a number of years to build up if we're talking about smaller amounts of alcohol.
All right. There's a really great question here as well from viewers. Are there different effects to the brain between women and men? So do we see differences between the genders?
Yeah, again, really great question, very interesting. Something we unfortunately weren't able to look at in our study, and one of the reasons for that was we didn't have many women, because the study was of civil servants in the 1980s in the UK, and there weren't very many women working there at that time. So I think we can't say for definite. What we do know is that women and men process alcohol differently, and that for any given amount that you drink, the blood alcohol in a woman is probably higher. So in theory that might be more damaging to the brain, but we haven't got studies that robustly demonstrate that as yet.
So you mentioned about how alcohol affects the brain in the sort of short term and things like that, but is there any information about the mechanism behind the long-term effects? So I mean, you said there was, smaller areas in the brain, but do we understand at all the mechanism of how that happens?
So we understand a bit better for the large amounts of alcohol. So alcohol is a neurotoxin, so it directly can kill brain cells. It also acts because it increases a kind of vitamin deficiency, something called thiamine, which is really important for brain health, so that it can have an effect that way as well. As I said, for moderate drinking, how it might damage, we don't know yet.
Okay, great. We've got another question here from our viewers. This time, are there any positive effects from alcohol that you're aware of?
Yeah, something we're all desperate for. So I think that there's been a story for a long time that drinking in moderation, perhaps a glass of red wine a day, might benefit your health. Most of that is because of the potential effects on the heart. So it might reduce your risks of having a heart attack or something like that. I think there's quite a lot of debate amongst experts at the moment about this point, with some recent research casting doubts about any protective effect. And my personal view is that actually some of these reported benefits might be an artifact of the way we're conducting the research, i.e. the kinds of people that drink small amounts of red wine might be healthier in other aspects, and so they're protected against heart attacks from that pathway, nothing to do with the fact that they're drinking.
Right, okay, so it's kind of based on the fact that the power of the study, that is not enough people who are representative enough are sort of making...
Not necessarily the power, it's something called confounding, so that the fact that the same kind of people who drink moderately might be healthier, and by then a sort of spurious association, it looks like the people that drink moderately are at lower risk because of their drinking, when actually it's just a coincidence, if you like.
Oh, okay. So another question, thanks, keep them coming in. If you are a fairly healthy person, will your brain cope better with alcohol than someone who is unhealthy?
I don't know is the shorter answer. I suppose there's two parts to that, aren't there? There's the kind of damage that alcohol does to the brain in anybody, and I'm not sure whether that will be affected by how healthy you are, but I suppose if you are generally very unhealthy and your brain has been damaged by other things you do, then maybe if you drink, your brain can't cope as well. So I'm not sure, but I can sort of see a theoretical argument why that might be the case.
Right, okay. So you mentioned that you were interested in looking at this question based on your clinical work. Could you say a little bit about that, where your interest came from?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an old age psychiatrist, and I do clinics where people with memory problems come and talk to me, and I assess them. And something I'd noticed was quite commonly people that were coming were drinking a fair bit, so maybe sharing a bottle of wine a night with their partner, and I started to think, could this be contributing in some way to their memory problems? Of course, as I mentioned, the story and the research was always that small amounts of social drinking was protective, but I couldn't quite marry that up with the known evidence that alcohol is a toxin to brain cells. I couldn't understand why, if it's a toxin, why should it be protective? So that, together with my clinical experience, really led me to research further into this area.
Okay, and so I guess you were quite lucky that there was already this data and this cohort of people. So you were coming to that data after it had already been collected, is that right?
So in the last 5 years, so I was very lucky. I mean, it's a very unique cohort, like you say, to have data on people's drinking habits and all the other things about their lifestyles over 30 years is unique. So that was a really valuable opportunity to look at this.
Awesome. So where do you think your research will be leading to? Obviously there's been quite a lot of publicity and awareness raising with the public. But yeah, what are your intentions next for the research? More research? Are you going to be talking to policymakers? Where next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the questions that have come in this afternoon give you an idea of the kind of questions I want to be trying to answer in the future. So, are particular people at risk of this kind of damage? Women versus men, other characteristics, other types of drinking patterns that put you at higher risk, or things that are protective. And I guess this is, one study, a large study, but it is one study, and we need to try and replicate this in other samples, larger samples as well.
Amazing. I just want to say hello to Argentina, Boston in the USA, and Thailand. Thanks so much for watching and your questions coming in. We've got a couple more. So someone's asked, how does age affect the way alcohol affects the brain? So do we know whether or not drinking alcohol has more of a negative effect or what on older brains, or do we know anything about that?
So we don't have hard evidence to say yes or no, it's worse in older people. We do know that as people get older, they get other medical illnesses and their brain function and structure can decline for other causes. So again, my kind of educated guess, if you like, is that it might be worse in older people, but I can't say for definite at the moment. Certainly how we process alcohol changes as we age and we get less good at it. The older members of the audience might appreciate that their hangovers have got worse as they get older. So again, it might have a worse effect on the brain, but we haven't got anything really hard to say definite yes or no at the moment.
And I suppose the best advice is obviously drink responsibly, be aware as you said, and things like that. But I'm sure some of us will be thinking, I know I am. Are there any things that we can do if we are going to drink, like keep hydrated? Is there anything at all that we know about helping if we're going to drink? What can we be doing there?
Yeah, so I think there's nothing specifically about protecting your brain, but there's general sensible things to do if you're drinking, i.e. not large amounts in small periods of time, eat before you start drinking, stay hydrated. I think there's some evidence to say that drinking darker kind of spirits, you might get worse hangovers. But this is all kind of sensible general advice rather than specifically for brain health.
Yep. But remember, drink responsibly.
Yes, and the quantity, the key thing, the quantity.
Yeah. We have a question here. Feel free not to answer this. They've asked, how often do you drink, Anya?
I've cut down.
I think we all have now.
So I do drink, but in moderation, and kind of a smaller glass since this research has come out.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, this is a question from South Africa, which you might know about. Can alcohol affect or lead to depression or mental illness at all?
Yeah, absolutely. We've just talked about memory and dementia so far today, but of course there are strong links with mental illnesses, particularly depression, anxiety. There's probably, it's kind of bi-directional, if you like, so people that are depressed or anxious probably drink more, but also drinking can increase your risk of becoming depressed or anxious as well. So there's strong links there.
So there's not much understanding of that interaction. You say it's kind of a bi-directional thing. So
yeah, so I think it goes both ways. There is some recent research actually that's looked at the genetics and show that there's genetic overlap. So those genes that make you more likely to develop depression also overlap with those genes that make you more likely to drink more. So I think it's a kind of evolving picture which we don't understand fully yet, but there's probably lots of complex interactions between the two.
Great. And I suppose in doing your research, is there anything that's kind of jumped out at you as being quite surprising or shocking at all?
In our study?
Yeah, in your study.
Yeah, I suppose it was just the quantity. We started the study fully expecting to replicate previous findings that drinking this sort of amount might be good for you, and we were quite shocked to see the sort of breadth of the negative effects and the really quite small quantities of alcohol needed to be associated with them.
Okay, and how have you found the response since the study came out?
Yeah, it's generated quite a lot of, as you say, worry is probably the best word. I think because it goes against the kind of established research and the fact that in a lot of countries these volumes of alcohol are really commonly drunk and thought of as safe. So it has got quite a lot of attention, yes.
Well, this has been super interesting. I think we're out of questions and everything like that. So thank you so much for joining us, Anya.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone else for joining us. Don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow talking about pain. And then on Friday, we're going to be doing a live brain imaging experiment from an MRI machine. So do come back on Friday. And yeah, thanks for joining us. See you next time.